Tēnā koutou katoa, te alofa and welcome back to this lunch and learn session, follow-up session, following my presentation last week. And thank you again for the opportunity to present last week and also for your engagement and feedback. It was really great and wonderful to share with you all. So I'm just going to provide this a bit of a recording, a recap of the key points of what I spoke to last week, for those who might have missed it, and then also to present some questions that might generate some discussion. So let's see if I can get this going. So as mentioned last week, this is based on my doctoral research, which is called Le Taurunga Tausinga, the epitome of care in search of Samoan cultural safety in physiotherapy. As a backdrop, in terms of the context, so during the Samoa measles outbreak, I was in Samoa supporting our physiotherapy colleagues there when, while I was working in ICU, I had this revelation that the way that I approached physiotherapy was steeped in my cultural upbringing. They were steeped in the protocols, the customs, the relational ethics of my forebears that was instilled in me in the Samoan community that I grew up in, and the Pacific family that raised me, and that shaped me more profoundly than perhaps my undergraduate physiotherapy training. And so I set up set on a journey to embark towards seeing if we could embed these sort of cultural protocols and paradigms and to inform the curriculum in order to support the current and emerging workforce in working with Samoan and Pacific families. For the PhD study, we honed in on Samoan participants, and this was intentional for three key reasons. The first, because I'm Samoan and a part of that community. Secondly, because the Samoans make up the largest subpopulation group of Pacific peoples in Aotearoa. Almost half of the Pacific population identifies Samoan. And lastly, because there's a push for and a need for ethnic specific research and data, noting that the Pacific umbrella, within the Pacific umbrella, is this rich diversity of Pacific languages, cultures, histories, that also have their own solutions to many issues that these communities face. In terms of methodologies and methods, we employed Talanoa, which is a Pacific and Samoan method of narrative inquiry or narrative dialogue, and also the Whaafaletui, which is a methodology first established by Tamasese and colleagues, which looks at gaining consensus within focus groups or fale, and then weaving those consensus together in order to articulate themes from in regards to the research question. And so combining those methods and methodologies together, I interviewed Samoan physios and families in New Zealand. And then because we're looking at Samoan cultural knowledge, we replicated that in Samoa as well. And so interviewed Samoan physios. But when we got to the families group, we realized that that physiotherapy is not as widely known or widely accessed by families in Samoa. And so we expanded this group to those with a working knowledge of physiotherapy, including other health officials from different health disciplines and also the traditional healers. From those sort of two nations, there was a fifth group that emerged, which comprised a group of elders or cultural custodians, people who were deeply versed in Samoan traditional knowledge and language, and they provided rich and profound insights as well. And so to the families in Aotearoa, I asked them this question: what has been your experience of physiotherapy in New Zealand? And they had said that it's a one-size-fits-all model. It's a model, particularly in private practice, where they value bums on seats. and they don't take the time to get to know people, and particularly what is important to Samoan people, which is often matters surrounding family. It's a monocultural, monolingual, Eurocentric system, and one that focuses and hones in on the issue or the disability or the condition that we're treating. And so there's this reductionist um, discourse, and it's one that renders Samoan people particularly vulnerable. And this is including for those who have been trained in this health system, including this mother who's a nurse, and yet she wasn't immune to the sense of vulnerability when seeking health services. And this reality was not lost on the Samoan physios as well. And they recognized that this model is incongruent with the values and needs of Samoan families and communities. And that this has actually been the case for a long time, and the literature is undeniable to that regard. And so when I asked these colleagues or these families, what does best practice look like? They pointed and signaled these people, the traditional healers or taulāsea. And they mentioned this because when they spoke about dignifying and culturally enhancing um, physiotherapy services, they mentioned that the traditional healers, they're always respectful in language and gesture and hospitality. These people are often known to the wider family, and so there's this extension of trust to them. They're easily accessible, so they can be accessed at any time of day. They just turn up. We don't have to make an appointment. They often don't require a cash payment upfront, but they can be provided gifts in kind. They speak their language in Samoan, and often in a form and a manner that is easily received and well received. They also use therapeutic touch while talking through their diagnostic process, and this is both educative on one hand, and also it soothes anxieties and meets some of the psychological, psychosocial health needs. And this is particularly important consideration for physiotherapists who, in the last few decades, have been really marked by a move towards exercise-based interventions and imaging in terms of diagnostic processes. And then lastly, as per the image, they utilize oils and balms that derived from our natural environment. And so there's this ecological aspect or element of health that's being met. So when I spoke to New Zealand-based Samoan physiotherapists, they mentioned these themes. So this concept of te olengva, of maintaining or nourishing and nurturing the relational space. They talked about holistic physiotherapy role models, the sense of needing more leaders that are visible so that others can see it and be it, essentially. And also, and that extends not only to sort of emerging workforce, but also to our colleagues in terms of modeling the behaviors and the approaches that best practice for our communities. And then lastly, they highlighted, sorry, second to last, they highlighted the barriers to accessing services. So both the socio-economic factors, but also the lack of awareness of the existing workforce in terms of providing safe health services. And this was all encapsulated in the concepts of ainga or family, and the concept of genealogy or tamali ianga. Tama meaning child of, and ali'i meaning a chief. So a child of a chief. So the sense of genealogy that every Samoan by birth is connected to and belongs to a chiefly system and chiefly family. And this is somewhat becomes, you can see this being repeated in the various groups So for the Samoan families in New Zealand, again, nurturing the relational space was critical. They also identified the barriers to um, receiving dignifying health services. They signaled the traditional healing practices, as I mentioned. And lastly, and quite importantly, they said that at its best, um, holistic physiotherapy gives hope. And one mother who um, mentioned this when I asked her the question, well, what would your advice be to new graduate physiotherapists joining the workforce? And she said, you are going to give hope to the patients that you will be working with. You're going to provide a lifeline to the patient and their family. And this was because the physiotherapist, in her experience, was the most consistent, most frequently seen, and often for the longest periods of time um, on the rehabilitation journey that her and her husband was on. And so that created this deep sense of trust and assurance that the physio was often the person that could receive questions and speak to some of those questions from the family. When we translated this in Samoa, again, you're starting to see the themes here. Um, and one thing I would note with this group was the pervasiveness of, or the embeddedness of traditional healers as part and parcel of Samoans' lives. So they're not a complementary health practitioner as the often seen in the Western world and in Aotearoa, but they are a part of village life and family life. Um, and so there's far more a closer connection with these healers and their practices. But they also provided a balanced view in the sense that they recognized that the traditional healers themselves also have their limitations, but particularly in their limitations in knowledge of anatomy and physiology. And because of these limitations that they are at risk of, and some of the participants provided examples of um, times when they've caused further injury um, or illness. I also want to touch here in terms of the sense of a holistic healthcare, and this is the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, health is multifactorial and integrated. So the sense of an ecological um, connection that is fundamental to well-being. That spirituality is also fundamental to well-being. And we see this again replicated in with the families and the health workers in Samoa. Um, and I guess notable here was particularly with the health officials, or both the health officials and the traditional healers actually, they recognize that there is an interface of the Western system in Samoa and the traditional system. And at times they work well together, but at other times they're also at odds with each other in terms of their philosophies and the sense of um, there is a bit of trying to phrase this diplomatically, but there's this sense of power and authority that the Western, particularly the medical professionals, hold over the traditional healers, and so navigating that would be important to really drawing the best out of both systems. And then lastly, this group of elders who provided some really profound insights um, into the research question, and perhaps the most was that the recognition that healthcare is probably the most profound expression of love or lofa in the Samoan context. And so when we combine all of these and synthesize these together, these different fale, we end up with these five key themes. And you would have picked the first three already, probably perhaps the first four. Um, and one of the greatest privileges of the research journey was, as I mentioned last week, was spending time with the former Prime Minister and former Head of State of Samoa, His Highness Tuiatua Tupua Tamasese Taisi Efi, and his good lady, Le Masiofo Filifilia Tamasese. they both are cultural custodians, perhaps the foremost cultural custodians with regards to traditional Samoan knowledge. Um, and so I was privileged to have them both as active participants in the study. When I asked Tupua what his view of the epitome of healthcare looked like, he shared an anecdote of an elderly couple who were gifted their grandson for to help assist them in their in their frailty, in their aging, sorry, with their chores. Unfortunately, this young boy, he sustained a head injury, had a fall, sustained a head injury, and that rendered him severely disabled to the point that it required this elderly couple to feed him, to dress him, to bathe him daily. And but they were adamant that they never wanted to part from him. And even when his parents came and sort of recognized that he was more of a burden to them than an assistance, but they were adamant that they didn't want him to leave their company, and so they cared for him right up to his death at the age of 21. And and this is of significance because Tupua was speaking of my uncle, who's that young boy, and my great grandparents, who was the elderly couple. And it's to them that I named this model which I've developed called the Fauolo framework. Fauolo was their surname. And the Fauolo framework is based on this traditional dance called the Tawalunga. The Tawalunga is the ancestral Samoan dance. It's the culmination of any celebratory event. It is based and centered around the Taupo, who's often the maiden of the village or the daughter of a high chief. She is the center of attention, and her role is to conduct her ancestral dance unimpeded. Um, she's flanked by a group of dancers, including the pictured here is a matai or a chief, and the matai sort of, if I move to the next one here, the matai represents that concept of tamali ianga or genealogy. To her, to our right here is a matua or parents, recognizing the importance of parents in decision making, and that the matua represents the importance of ainga or family. The aiuli here is a health professional, and that's any health worker, but in this case, this context, is the physiotherapist. And the aiuli's role is to clear the environment before the taupo's arrival, and then to protect her right throughout the dance so that she can conduct her dance unimpeded, and then dance as skillfully and as powerfully as he or she can, in order to bring honor and dignity to the occasion and to the family. Lastly, here in the bottom left is the in the days pre-electricity, these people were tasked of working in the background to go between a fire source and the tawalunga to illuminate the tawalunga. And the more effectively they could do that, obviously the longer the tawalunga could last for, and they were known as the aumuafi. And so when we translate that into the contemporary sort of health context, we see that the taupo is the patient. They are at the center of any health interaction. Um, the matai are still present here, and that's in recognition of how widely the decision making can go for Samoan families. That it's not just those who are linked by direct relationship. Um, on the right, here's the matua or the family members. Here's the health professional or the physiotherapist. And then here, the aumuafi represent the policymakers. So those who work busily in the background, setting the environments or the settings that enable this interaction to happen as effectively as possible. And so in closing, that's sort of the synthesis of those five themes. Um, and the in-between is also really important because the in-between is where is that sense of the te o le wā, so the nurturing of that relational space. And the reason why the Tawalunga was chosen was because it's a dynamic space and the health interactions are like that. Sometimes you have a lot of interaction with the patient or the taupo, and sometimes you don't have much. And so it sort of flexes and wanes as the health journey progresses. Um, but there's always a maintenance of that relational space. And the focus is always and maintains is maintained on the taupo. And so, in closing, and the questions that I'd love to leave you with, and also welcome many more questions from the group. But the questions I'd like to leave you with is: how could the Fa'olo framework inform your clinical practice, if at all? Um, what is the relevance for other health professionals? Noting that this has been developed within a physiotherapy context, but it's my belief that it has potential implications and relevance for other health professionals. But I'd love to hear if you agree and or not, and why. And then lastly, is there anything that you would change? I guess, and I'm being a bit vulnerable here, but are there any sort of developments you think you would like to see, um, or anything? Yeah, any thoughts, any other thoughts, feel free to share amongst the group. I'll also endeavour to send out a written survey so you can provide some thoughts that way. But again, thank you for your attention. Um, very best wishes, and particularly with working with our Samoan and our Pacific families. Thank you for your efforts there, and please continue to do the good work. And I hope this talk helps you in that effort. Ia manuia lava, whawhatai.